I pressed the last apron seam flat with the edge of my palm, then folded it neatly over the back of Mave's chair. The tablecloth had dried darker than expected. Navy bled into the cream, but it looked strong under the garden lights. 79 chairs stood in perfect rows across the lawn, one at the head for her. The scent of cilantro and pepper jelly floated from the trays lined up near the pergola. My hands ached from slicing for hours, but it was the kind of ache that felt earned, a good ache. The kind that means something is ready. Gravel crunched on the front drive. Caleb stepped out of his car wearing pressed khakis and that soft wrinkled smile he reserved for when he thought I might cry. "Hey," he said, glancing around. "This looks really full." His voice pulled tight as he walked toward me, eyeing the lanterns, the platters, the handmade signs. Behind him, Hadley's heels clicked on the stone. Her hair was curled too tight, lips too pink. She scanned the setup like it was a motel buffet. Caleb stopped near the smoker and rubbed his hands together. "Listen, we moved the party." My fingers clenched the linen hem at my side. "It's at the lounge on Fairburn, closer to the city, less, rustic." His eyes flicked toward the centerpieces I'd made from cotton spools and baby's breath. Hadley adjusted the strap of her purse. "They've got catering, vegan options, and music that doesn't come from a Bluetooth speaker." I didn't move. The barbecue pit hissed behind me. Caleb shifted his weight, then let his eyes drop to my dress. Thin plaid, the one I wore to the farmer's market in early spring. I told them, he muttered, brushing imaginary dust from his cuff, "You'd probably still be in your market clothes." My apron, still warm from the iron, slid from Mave's chair and crumpled onto the grass. He turned back toward the car. "It's nothing personal," but I had already stopped listening. The first spoon clattered in the warming tray behind me. I didn't look back at the food. I just walked toward the folding table with my phone and started dialing. The car reversed slowly down the gravel taillights, blinking like nothing had happened. Caleb didn't wave. Hadley didn't look back. The only sound left was the quiet whir of the fan inside the smoker and the occasional snap of a table runner in the wind. I stepped into the garden. The chairs stood untouched, perfect rows, waiting for a celebration that would never come. The centerpieces were starting to wilt under the late sun. I brushed a dead blossom off one, then moved on. The cakes were still cold in the cooler. I had made 3 strawberry sponge-spiced almond and lemon thyme. I stacked them myself, layer by layer, over the course of 2 mornings. By the drink table, the condensation from the pitchers had puddled into wet rings. I wiped one with my sleeve. No music, no chatter. Just the soft creak of the old wooden arbor swaying slightly over the head table. I returned to the prep station and opened the red notebook I'd kept on the folding stool since early May. Every ingredient written in fine black ink. Every receipt paper-clipped behind the menu plan. 12 cartons of eggs, 30 pounds of chicken thighs, 6 bottles of hibiscus syrup, all of it cataloged because if I didn't do it, no one would know what it cost. Not just in money, in mornings, in wrists that no longer stir without complaint, in space. At 6:41 p.m., I folded the apron again, set it gently on the table near the guest book. Then I picked up my phone from the windowsill and opened the contact list. My thumb hovered. I passed over Caleb's number, over Mave's, then paused at the one I hadn't used in years. Grace Haven, kitchen. I tapped the green icon. A ring. Then another. A voice answered, warm, cautious. I cleared my throat. "I have food for 80. Hot. Ready. You'll need vans." There was a pause, then a rustle of movement. "Where are you?" I glanced at the garden, just west of downtown. White house. Green shutters. At 7:30 sharp, a pair of headlights blinked down the drive, slow and careful. I opened the side gate. The wind carried in something new, not pity. Movement. The first van rolled in quietly, tires crunching the gravel, as if it didn't want to announce itself. The side door slid open, and faces appeared careful, uncertain. A woman held a paper bag tight to her chest. A man steadied himself on the step before hopping down. Two kids leaned forward, eyes wide, at the lights strung across the yard. I lifted a hand and motioned them through the gate. Plates here, I told the volunteer in the orange vest, tapping the long folding table. Cups on the far end. Juice, first, then water. My voice sounded steady, useful. More vans followed. People lined up without being asked. No one complained about the wait. No one asked what the occasion was. They moved like guests who didn't want to take up too much space. I opened the hall closet and pulled out the stack of blank paper tags I'd bought for place cards. The drawer beneath held a handful of markers, their caps cracked from age. I wrote names when I knew them. When I didn't, I drew a small circle or a star and pressed the adhesive to a sleeve. A toddler tugged the hem of my dress. His hands were sticky, his cheeks shiny with sweat. More yellow rice, he announced, pointing with authority. I scooped another spoonful onto his plate and slid it back. He grinned, then sprinted off, nearly colliding with a woman carrying a tray of cups. At the chafing dishes, a volunteer worked with quiet efficiency, sliding trays, checking temperatures. She had flour on her forearm, a pale dusting, like a memory. You know your way around this, I observed, handing her a clean towel. She smiled, without looking up. Used to run a bakery in Charlotte. Closed when rent jumped. We worked side by side, plating, wiping, refilling. She tore foil with her teeth. I adjusted the flame. We talked about yeast ratios and proofing times, about ovens that ran hot, about the comfort of doing the same thing every morning. No one asked whose party it was. As the yard filled, the noise changed. Laughter threaded through the air. Chairs scraped closer together. Someone turned the music dial just enough to be heard. I stood back for a moment, hands resting on the table edge, and watched people eat like they'd been invited. From the driveway, headlights flared again, bright and familiar, cutting across the lawn. The music had quieted. Most plates were empty, napkins, folded, chairs pushed back in the grass. I was wiping down the last serving table with a damp cloth when the headlights reappeared. This time, I didn't step forward. Caleb parked at the edge of the driveway, angled like he hadn't meant to stop. The passenger door stayed closed. Hadley didn't come. He walked toward the garden with his blazer folded over one arm and his tie stuffed in a pocket. His shirt was wrinkled hair, slightly damp, like he'd splashed water on his face in a rush. I didn't greet him. He stopped short of the gate, looked around at the empty trays, the stacked chairs, the plastic bins filled with soapy water. I need the envelope. His voice wasn't loud, just tight, like he'd practiced saying it calmly and still failed. You promised it, he added. They're expecting it. I stayed behind the gate. My hands were still wet. I reached into the apron pocket and pulled out the envelope I had sealed that morning before the first slice of fruit had hit the tray. He stepped closer. You can't do this right now. I didn't move. You have 3 minutes, I said, quietly, clearly. You won't step inside. He hesitated, then held out his hand. The envelope made no sound as it passed between us. He glanced down like he wanted to tear it open there, but the porch light caught his profile. He didn't want me to see his face when he read it. You don't understand what this does to me, he muttered, adjusting his grip on the paper. I folded the towel over the table edge. He looked past me toward the garden where one of the folding tables still held juice cups and a tub of sliced melon, where the chalkboard still said, "Congratulations, Mave," in yellow handwriting. You made this ugly, he said. I looked him in the eye, one hand resting on the gate latch. No, I said. You made it invisible. He blinked. Once. then turned without a word and walked back to his car. I didn't watch him leave. I reached for the hose and turned the water on. The metal nozzle clicked in my palm. Caleb waited until they were back inside the venue, something sleek and cold with chrome chairs and teal uplighting that made everyone's teeth look blue in the photos. He ducked into a hallway near the restrooms, checked over his shoulder once, and tore open the envelope. No cash, no check. Just a folded statement printed on thick paper and a handwritten note tucked behind it. His eyes ran over the letterhead NC 529 plan. Beneficiary Mave T. Blythe. Account summary. Current balance. Withdrawal terms. His name nowhere on it. My signature clearly printed beside hers listed as co-authorizer. The note wasn't dramatic. One line square in the center of an index card. She earned her future. You don't get to sell it. He ran his hand through his hair teeth, grinding so hard his jaw clicked. Somewhere in the main room, applause rose, probably for the speech he was supposed to give. He checked his phone. 2 texts from Hadley. "Where are you? They're asking about the gift." He turned his phone face down against the wall and closed his eyes. Then it vibrated again, automated notification this time. Insurance policy ending tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. Policy holder Rowena L. Blythe. Vehicle 2019 Subaru Outback. Premium canceled. He pushed off the wall, walked quickly past the photo booth, and dropped the empty envelope in a half-filled punch bowl. Behind the bar, the catering lead was arguing with Hadley about Capri's skewers. Mave wasn't in sight. He found a quiet corner near the coat rack and opened his phone again. Wireless account alert billing profile removed. Line scheduled for suspension. The number listed was his. He stared at it, then checked the name at the top. Rowena Blythe, primary account holder. He'd never paid for that phone, not once since grad school. She just never said no, not until today. He shoved the phone into his pocket and stood still, surrounded by rented chairs and chilled shrimp, listening to strangers raise glasses for a girl they'd barely met. He looked down at the folded statement one last time, then tore it once across the middle. But it didn't feel like anything changed. The lights flickered as the DJ swapped playlists. He didn't go back in. Not yet. The morning air carried the scent of charcoal and rain-wet basil. I poured 2 mugs of coffee, the kind that stains your fingers if you hold the cup too tight. Yvonne sat cross-legged on the porch steps, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her van was parked at the edge of the driveway. Windows fogged slightly from the night. We ate from mismatched plates, red beans, spiced rice, a few slices of the almond cake that somehow held its shape overnight. She pointed at the foil trays stacked beside the garden hose. "You really cooked all that yourself?" I nodded and leaned against the post. 3 weeks of grocery runs, about $220 a week, give or take. She whistled. "That's more than most wedding caterers spend." My back would agree. She laughed into her coffee. I smiled, but it faded quick. "The cooking's the easy part," I added. "It's waking up at 4 that gets you. Stirring a pot in silence. Second-guessing whether hibiscus syrup is too strong for lemonade." Yvonne tucked her legs in. The tablecloths were something else. That plum color felt expensive. I dyed them myself. Originally planned for marigold, but it looked harsh against the grass. Plum felt gentler. We sat a while like that. Quiet, not awkward. 2 women who knew the weight of too many lists and too few thanks. I told her I donated everything. The brisket, the beans, the cut fruit, even the copper pans my husband left me. He used to polish them with salt and lemon, like they were instruments. Everything. Yvonne raised an eyebrow. Everything but one. I rose and stepped back inside. The sink was half-drained warm water, cloudy with starch. At the bottom sat the old enamel spoon, still faintly marked with Mave's initials hand-etched when she was 7, and wanted her own serving tool. I dried it, slowly pressing the cloth into the grooves of each letter. Back on the porch, I didn't explain what it was. I just set the spoon beside my plate handle, facing out, where someone could reach for it. Yvonne didn't ask. She just passed the coffee pot and filled my cup to the brim. Mave arrived on Sunday morning with the cautious knock of someone who expects the door to stay closed. I opened it anyway. She stood on the porch with her hands folded, hair pulled back, eyes rimmed pink. No bag, no entourage, just her. We sat in the garden where the chairs had been stacked and the tables cleared. The grass still bore the faint squares where feet had pressed it flat. A breeze lifted the edge of the plum table runner I hadn't yet folded away. She spoke first, voice low, eyes on the ground. I saw the pictures. I waited. A woman from the firm recognized you. She posted them. Everyone started sharing. Mave swallowed. I didn't know it happened like that. I poured water into 2 glasses and slid one across the table. The rim clinked softly against the wood. She wrapped both hands around the glass. I'm sorry. The apology landed, but it didn't settle. I watched a cloud pass over the sun, the light thinning across the yard. Her shoulders tightened. Was it really because I didn't stop them? I breathed in slow and let the quiet stretch long enough to be honest. They called my clothes embarrassing. My fingers traced the grain of the table. They said I didn't look right for their guests. They said you'd be ashamed of me. Mave's head snapped up. I wasn't. I know. I met her gaze. But you were silent. Her mouth opened, then closed. She pressed her lips together and nodded once a small, sharp movement. The wind stirred the chalk dust still clinging to the board near the fence. I thought staying quiet would keep the peace, she murmured. I leaned back in my chair. Peace that costs someone their dignity isn't peace. It's payment. She wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand. I didn't know how to choose. I can't protect you from who raised you. The words felt steady, leaving me. But I can remind you who raised me. Mave's shoulders eased just a fraction. She set the glass down carefully, like she didn't want to break anything else. We sat there a moment longer, the garden breathing around us, and I folded the runner with deliberate care, already knowing what would stay and what would be let go next. The envelope was cream-colored, hand-addressed, no return name, just a logo in the corner. I recognized Grace Haven. I opened it at the kitchen counter while the kettle hummed behind me. Inside, a folded card. The handwriting varied: block letters, cursive loops, shaky lines squeezed into corners. 37 signatures in total. First names only a few with hearts or stars. One simply read, warm food, real napkins. Thank you. Behind the card, a photograph slipped out. Someone must have taken it during the early rush. I was mid-laugh hair, slightly undone, apron creased. I held out a plate piled high with rice and beans to a boy in a green dinosaur hoodie. His hood was up. His mouth was open, mid-giggle. Behind me, the garden shimmered lanterns, glowing shadows, soft, everything alive. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked to my little desk in the sewing room, cleared a pushpin from a pattern board, and pinned the photo just above the edge of my ledger. The boy's hoodie made it feel like it belonged there. The phone rang once before I could sit. Caleb's name lit up the screen. I let it fade. A minute later, a text from Hadley blinked through. Hope you're happy. He's humiliated. I pressed my finger to the message, held it, and deleted it without opening. The tea kettle hissed and clicked off on its own. I poured the water stirred in a spoonful of honey and took the cup to the garden. The air was soft that evening. No wind. Just the lingering scent of citrus peels from the compost bin and the sweet smoke that still clung to the edge of the smoker lid. I traced my foot over the flattened patch of grass where the main table had stood. Something green had started to poke through, already resilient and slow, like anything worth keeping. From inside the house, the wind caught the edge of a window frame and nudged it closed with a gentle thud. I didn't get up to latch it. I stayed in the garden hands, wrapped around the warm mug, thinking not of who had left, but who had stayed. The garden had settled into something softer. The flattened grass had begun to spring back. A few birds nested in the trellis. I was peeling garlic on the porch when the gate creaked open. Mave stepped through her arms full. She crossed the yard carefully, head bowed slightly, as if the wrong step might spook the welcome. One hand clutched something wrinkled and folded tight. The other held a thin wooden frame. She set both items on the table. The first was the banner. Congratulations! Mave painted in block letters I had traced myself over 3 nights. It was crumpled, smudged, but not torn. I pulled it from the trash behind the lounge, she said, brushing a bit of lint from the edge. It still smells like barbecue. The second was her college transcripts. My copy. I had laminated them and slipped them into a frame I kept out in the shed next to the tools and winter tarps. She'd never seen it before. I lifted the lid on the stew pot, steam rising between us. Lentils, cumin, a bit of leftover roasted squash. We ate in silence. Mave tucked her hair behind her ear. Her spoon clinked once against the side of the bowl before she set it down. I don't want to be like them. Her voice didn't tremble. I don't want to walk into rooms and act like I belong just because someone else got erased first. I pushed a small notebook toward her. The red ledger, the kind I used for everything. Blank pages. Crisp spine. A folded receipt from the co-op store still tucked in the front. She opened it with both hands, gently. I want to know how to do what you did, she said. Feed 80 people and make them feel seen. I refilled her bowl. You start with what they're hungry for. Then you give them more than food. Her fingers traced the edge of the ledger like it held something sacred. She didn't ask to stay. She didn't have to. I poured her water from a ceramic jug, the same one I'd used that night. We sat at the same table, only this time neither of us flinched at the quiet. Late summer softened everything. The heat arrived, gently settled into the soil, and stayed. Grace Haven's community garden stretched wider than it had in the spring tomatoes, heavy on the vine herbs brushing against bare ankles as people moved between the beds. I arrived early with 2 covered trays balanced on my arms. Citrus bean salad on the left, pineapple, rice on the right. Mave followed close behind, careful not to trip over the roots near the gate. The tablecloths she'd stitched herself were folded neatly in her taupe plum and cream edges, straight stitches tight. We laid the cloths across the long tables while the volunteers set out plates. I showed Mave how to weigh down the corners with smooth stones so the wind wouldn't lift them. She listened. She always did now. By noon, the space filled, not with the hush of obligation, but the low hum of people who expected to be fed. Yvonne arrived carrying a foil pan and a Grin cornbread, still warm enough to fog the lid. You brought the good one, Mave said, lifting the edge to peek. Yvonne shrugged, wiping her hands on her jeans. Couldn't disappoint the teacher. Every Friday, I taught a bulk cooking class in the shelter kitchen. 3 hours, no shortcuts. We talked about cost per serving, how to stretch flavor without stretching people thin. Mave stood beside me writing notes in the red ledger flower smudged on her sleeve. When it was time to serve, I reached into my bag and pulled out the last item. The casserole spoon caught the light enamel gleaming. Mave's initials were still etched near the handle, the grooves softened by years of use. I set it at the center of the table, handle turned outward. People lined up. Plates filled. Someone laughed too loud. Someone else asked for seconds without apology. I didn't scan the crowd for familiar faces. I didn't brace for absence. I moved from table to table, refilling trays, straightening chairs, breathing in the smell of citrus and warm grain. The garden held steady beneath our feet, generous and unbothered. When the sun dipped low, I wiped the spoon clean and placed it back in my bag, already thinking about what we'd cook next week.